Hello, now we are officially starting. Welcome to St. Paul's Howell Hill. My name is Nico. I get to be leading this congregation with a whole group of amazing people. So it's great to see you and welcome you to this church. And today we've got Tom with us, joining us for Big Questions. I don't know if you've heard of Big Questions. We did one some months ago, but basically what we want is to ask big questions and ask someone who's an expert in this area to help us think through that and then raise any other questions we might have, either about this theme or other things that might be in our hearts, in our minds. So I'm going to ask a few questions of Tom so we get to know him a bit better. I met Tom maybe 2 years ago. We were doing something similar in a different church. And Tom works for, it's OCCA, but it's Oxford Centre for Christian Apologetics.
You've got it.
Yes, got it. So this is what Tom does for a living. He shares in universities and different places these big questions and debates and has discussions and tries to answer questions. But your background is quite academic, so you've studied quite a bit. Do you want to share a bit of your academic background?
Sure. So I'm a philosopher and a theologian, and at the moment I'm doing some research. I'm researching for a doctorate in philosophy of religion, and I'm exploring a problem called the problem of divine hiddenness. And this is slightly similar to the problem of pain and evil, but it's the problem of why doesn't God heal? Why doesn't God answer my prayers? Why don't I see God in many situations that I want to see him in? Why are there individuals sometimes where we see them? I've got many friends who say, I've looked into faith, I've looked into questions of faith, but I'm not persuaded. They seem very sincere in that interest and in that investigation, but they sometimes come away unpersuaded. Why is that the case? So I'm interested in those questions, and I'm just halfway through a PhD in that area. But I came into theology and philosophy through computer science. I was an undergraduate at Reading. I'd taken 7 or 8 gap years. I'd done loads of different things, some of them less legal than other things, and I'd sitting there in my first year of a computer science degree, and the lecture was on artificial intelligence. Now, we know all about this now, don't we? Because it's 2023, and we've been talking about ChatGPT and AI, or some of us have, for the last year or so, and we've been saying, wow, this is really going to change the world. This was 2000, year 2000. This was a while ago. So I was sitting there in the lecture. I listened to this amazing lecture on computer science. I was not a religious believer or a Christian believer at all. And I remember thinking, I've got some really big questions I need to ask about this. And so I went up to the professor and asked him a question.
So I have to ask, what was the question, of course?
So the question was this. I said, Professor, thank you for your lecture. I waited for everybody else to go because I thought my question might be a bit silly. But it turns out it was quite a good question. The question was, are we ever going to be able to make computers, machines, think and reason like people can? And he said, He said, it all depends. I said, what does it depend on? He said, if you think a human being, a person, is a complicated biological machine, reactions on reactions on reactions, chemical reactions feeding other chemical reactions, and so our thoughts are all chemical reactions, and our impulses and what we really are is describable in terms of the language of mathematics or simply chemistry. If you think that's all we are, just complicated biomechanical machines, then yes, we can make a computer think like a person can, because all we need is to have a complex enough scanner and a complex enough computer system. We can scan, we can replicate. That would be what we would do. But if you think a human being is more than a complicated biomechanical machine, if you think a human being has a soul or a spark or some other aspect on top of the biological and the electrical and the physical, if you think there's something more to a human being on top of the biology, then no, I don't think we can do that, because we're working with a natural system, and a human being may be more than that. And I said, that sounds like a philosophical question. He said, it is. It's outside of this subject. And so I was very glad that my uncle over a late night drink one Christmas morning back in 1997, 98. He was, we called him Uncle Leighton. He actually, in his time, was the principal lawyer for the Beatles. He did all the IP for the Beatles. He persuaded me to do philosophy as part of my degree. And so a few years later, I remembered that and said, okay, I need to do philosophy with my degree. I didn't really know why. One of those things that you just sort of find out later makes sense. So I then said to the professor, it just so happens I'm a double honors student. I'm doing computer science and philosophy. He said, well, you're fine. Go and do philosophy. So then I threw myself into philosophy, and that question, what is a human being, opened up field and book and lecture, and it carried on opening up all these areas because I realized in order to answer the question, I had to look outside of the question.
It's brilliant. And I'm sure we'll hear a bit more of that
Maybe,
journey in a while. And one thing I found really interesting is when now in your PhD, you're doing something related to movies and films, and you're looking at the hidden God, or a God who doesn't always seem to be as seen as we'd like to.
Yeah.
And you're studying that with movies. How does that work?
So two ways, just quickly. First thing is that a lot of philosophy, whether we're talking about European philosophy or whether we're talking about British and American flavors of philosophy, tend to approach the difficult questions about God in specific ways, but they're often orientated by the toolkit they're using. It's a bit like you set out to fix the car, and you get out your spanners or you get out your cleaning kit, and that's the toolkit you're going to use, and that's the task you're going to do. And I think that sometimes philosophy and the way we approach big questions in life, sometimes we think this is the method we're going to use before we even know what the answer is. And I'm not sure we have the answer to know what the correct method is yet. So I'm interested in how the arts, how poetry says more honestly things about tragedy and love and grief than a philosopher's textbook says. I'm interested in how a love song captures unrequited and unreturned, or even the brokenheartedness of love, or the joy of being in love. I'm interested in how and why songs capture that stuff better than textbooks. And I'm looking at how film, a particular film director, how he approaches this problem of why isn't God more visible? Why is God hidden sometimes? Why don't we see him more? So one way I do it is I'd say I'm looking at how film functions as a way of thinking about the world, a way of investigating the world. And I think the argument is, you cannot describe tragedy without using a story. It's impossible to describe really meaningfully what a tragedy is without telling some sort of story and describing it in a story form. And that seems to show that some things are better accessed through some particular forms and some investigations. So I'm interested in how film might help us to add new ways of looking at some problems. I don't think I'll solve the problems, but I think it might add some different lenses to look at it.
And last question before we go to your talk. So you said you were at university and you didn't believe in God, and now you work in a position where basically you're sharing about God in different places, and that's your full-time job. What happened in between? What was the jump?
Pretty big flip.
It is quite a big jump.
Because I wasn't just somebody who didn't quietly believe. I was arguing against it. When I decided that when I became a Christian in that sort of later in that first year of university, my best friend John said to me, "You have committed intellectual suicide. You've thrown any meaningful chance of making sense of questions of life out of the window. I'm really sorry." He was angry and disappointed in me. And that lasted about 15 years. He got baptized in 2015 in an icy pond. So God won that one, not me. God won that one. But my journey was, first of all, I thought so I had this professor's question, like, what is a human being? How do we make sense of that? But I was also under the impression that when I started to do philosophy and I started to look at these sort of big questions, I was a bit under the impression that what I would see in the university was that belief in God was for yesterday. It wasn't a live, valid option for thinking people today. I thought that it might reflect what I saw in the media, that God is the thing that people who are crazy believe, or people who do unpleasant things. I thought that that would be the same picture that I would see in the philosophy department and in the way that the modern academy, this great center of learning, how this would approach religion. And I was really stunned to see that in most of the departments in a modern university, take any university in the world, in most of the departments you will have very bright, thoughtful religious believers. In the physics department, for one example, in Oxford, there are a number of different Christian believers who attend local churches. Take any department in the Western world, and you'll find thoughtful professors who hold to a religious, supernatural view of the world. They won't all necessarily be Christians of one type or another, but there's a broad respect for the Christian perspective as a thinking and thoughtful option for people to think about. And I was interested in that because I'd heard a lot of critique of religion outside from people like Richard Dawkins and from skeptics and from the media, and certainly culturally many of my friends thought it was ridiculous. And I did too, but I was stunned to see that it had a respectability. The next stage of that was to say, okay, I not only respect that these people are smart and they believe it, but what are their reasons? And I started to look into their reasons. That led to me gradually, very slowly, journeying, bit by bit, month by month, reading more, reflecting more, arguing back more, and then gradually I came to the point of view where I said to myself, this is a really good explanation for a lot of things in the world. It doesn't explain everything, but it explains a lot of different things. And some of the biggest hang-ups I had with things like pain and suffering and evil and hiddenness, and I'm still working on some of those responses and still thinking about those, but generally I found it really made sense of all sorts of other questions I was asking, like what is a human being and where did the universe come from and what are moral values and why do we have this sense of meaning and this longing to be loved and this excitement about community, and why can we use our intellectual resources like science on the world, and why is it intelligible to us, and why do we discover order in the world and uniformity and these different things. I found that the Christian perspective was actually a very interesting option on that table. So I'd gone from disrespect to respect to, okay, I think I might be coming to see this as a valid option. And then gradually I realized that I thought it was true. And it was of no relationship to my life and to the way I live my life. It had no relationship to what I did in the Students' Union on a Wednesday or Thursday night. It had no connection to my drug use or to my relationships or to anything else. But I just thought it was true. It was like an idea out there that I thought was probably true. And for about 6 months, I existed in this sort of parallel universe where I thought that there was probably a God and that he'd probably revealed himself. But that wasn't the truth that I experienced. I experienced a different world from that. And then gradually, those worlds converged. And that led to me kneeling down in my... well, I'll tell you the story at the end.
Brilliant. Looking forward to it. So if you've got any questions, Tom's going to be using a PowerPoint, so maybe try and go into that website now, and you can have it open and ask questions afterwards whilst he's speaking. But Tom, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. If you wouldn't mind just being patient for a second, I'm just going to plug in, and sometimes technology's fun. So we'll see if it works. Okay. I had the hope that I might show you some visual images so that at least if I'm sending you to sleep, that might bring you back. There's always a risk with a philosopher that they think they're more interesting than the audience does. Let's see how we get on. So the topic this evening that we were going to spend some time reflecting on and thinking about together was, are all religions the same? And perhaps there are some other questions that are connected to this, like who is the religious believer, and what authority do they have to say that all that there's only one way to know God? Aren't all the religions the same? Don't they basically teach the same fundamental ideas about worship and about respect for people and about honoring God? Shouldn't God just, if God's good, welcome people who are sincere, regardless of where they grow up or what culture they're in? I think a lot of people in our modern world, quite reasonably, are concerned about religious divisiveness. And I want to discuss that question, responses to religious divisiveness, this evening as a way of coming at this. And I think we'll see some things. So, why can't God just welcome those who are sincere people? These are questions that I think we feel uncomfortable about. We might actually find ourselves somewhat drawn to Christ's personality. Jesus is an attractive individual. He teaches an ethic of loving people, of telling people the truth, speaking truth to power. He's an attractive person, and many of us find ourselves drawn towards him, at least his ethics, his teaching, his life in some sort of way. And maybe we're also drawn towards the Christian community. We find a place of acceptance, of friendship, a place where we're welcomed. But then alongside that, this sort of interest in Jesus that we might experience and a vibrant Christian community of friendships, or we might also find ourselves being a bit affronted by this idea that this sort of quite intolerant sounding claim that Christians often make, where they say it's only through Christ that you can have a relationship with God. That seems affronting, it seems rude, it seems like quite an arrogant and high claim to make. Seems like the sort of thing that somebody who is a rude person might say. So how do we respond to this? What should we say in response to this? Let me tell you a quick story. It's not true, but I wish it was. During a trial, a prosecuting barrister calls his first witness. She's an elderly grandmother. He calls her to the stand. He approaches her and he says, "Mrs. Smith, do you know me?" And she responds and she says, "Yes, Mr. Williams, I know you. I've known you since you were a little boy. And frankly, you've been a big disappointment to me. You lie, you cheat on your wife, you manipulate people, you talk about them behind their backs. You think you're a big shot when you haven't got the brains to realize you will never amount to much. Yes, I know you." The barrister nearly dies. He's absolutely stunned. Like, he's never seen this happen before. So not knowing what else to do, he quickly points across the room and asks at the opposing barrister, "Mrs. Smith, do you know the defense barrister?" She again replies, "Well, yes, I've known Mr. Rogers since he was a boy too. He's lazy, he's overweight, he has a drinking problem, he can't have a normal relationship with anybody, he has the worst legal practice I've ever seen, not to mention he has cheated on his wife with 3 different women, one of whom was your wife. Yes, I know Mr. Rogers." The defense barrister nearly dies at this point. The judge asks both of the casees to approach the bench and in a very quiet voice says to them, "If either of you 2 idiots ask her if she knows me, you'll both be going to jail today." The interesting thing in this silly story is that there's a person in here who's telling the truth, and it makes people very uncomfortable. What she says is not kind, but it may have been true. When somebody tells us the truth, our urge sometimes is to say, "Get them away, get them out of here." We live in a culture now where we tend to see everything as just opinion. We don't have much confidence that what we know is true and real. And we often say, truth defined by the history writers or by the powerful. And we've seen a loss of trust in many different areas, in terms of relationships and families, in terms of markets, in terms of our trust in journalists and the media, like phone hacking. We've seen a crisis of trust in politicians, in terms of Partygate, etc., flipping properties and expense fiascos and their conduct. We've seen this sort of idea of, you could litigate what you can get away with. We've seen people making fraudulent insurance claims just from faking, jumping in front of cars or falling over on the road. We've seen the dash cams of it. And we've also seen, massive companies who have fixed their cars so they pass emissions tests. We've seen companies in the last couple of weeks who have pumped raw sewage into rivers. We don't exactly live in a world that invites us to trust everyone and everything around us. And so there's a bit of a crisis of trust. We don't know who to trust. And combined with this very powerful culture of advertising and spin and media kind of messaging, it makes us kind of a bit skeptical and a bit cynical. At the same time, we've seen the rise of the sciences. Over the last 200 years, the sciences, the empirical sciences, have improved our medical care, they've relieved pain, they've improved sanitation, they've reduced disease, they've extended our lifespans, they've blessed us in all sorts of ways. And while the sciences have been ascending and providing us with all these safeties, including things like jabs against infectious diseases and pandemics, religious fundamentalists have made the news by crashing planes into buildings and, in the name of their religious beliefs, have shown just how violent and maniacal they can be. I mean, it's not rocket science to sort of think which way people are going to trust, which way people are going to go. There's a massive increase in information. We now live in the information age with the advent of the internet. We've got so much information now, we don't know how to think it all through. And we have a sort of option paralysis. I was looking this afternoon for some bags of mortar mix. This will show you how nerdy I am. Paving mix. I want to do a bit of a retaining wall in the garden. I didn't do it right the first time around. I need to go back and do it. And I was presented with so many choices, I just felt baffled. I don't know which of these 20 different bags I need. I can't decide right now. I've got to do more research. I'll come back to this later. We are absolutely baffled by the information flow that's coming towards us. Different religions, different perspectives, different worldviews. Maybe it's easier to just say they're all true, they're all right. And so there's a lack of clarity about what knowledge is. There's a lack of clarity and a lack of trust. We've seen the rise of this very trustworthy way of knowing the sciences, and we've seen religious knowledge destabilizing and being linked to dangerous instabilities and fundamentalisms and violence. And so we've adopted a kind of skepticism about truth, where we don't think the truth is really something we can know in a concrete way. We've become cynical about truth itself, except when a child goes missing. And we know that there's a truth to be found, and we hold the detectives to account until they find that individual and they work out what's happened. Suddenly then all the skeptical theories are torn up, but most of the time we are skeptical. And when people propose or talk about the idea of one religious answer or religious truth, it fills and fits into this sort of worldview, this lens, this perspective that we carry with us, this cynicism, this desire to trust and to find answers, but not knowing where to trust. And we live in a culture of fake news as well. All sorts of things have been distributed as fake news, and we don't really know who to trust. We maybe look at fact-checking websites. We try to sort of adopt attitudes of critical thinking, but does it really help us to make headway through it all? Here's the fundamental problem that I think we have when it comes to many different religions, when it comes to Jesus and Christians and others saying things like, there's one way to know God. Here's the fundamental problem that I think we have. When people become religious, they think they're right and they think that others are wrong. This leads to a kind of us and them thinking. The outsiders then become maybe depersonalized, and this increases the amount of suspicion, division, and violence in our world. If something's exclusive, it means that's the only place you can get it. And this idea of this us and them thinking that religion and religious truths create is the worry of our age in many ways. And this is the problem of the divisiveness of religion. When we look at the news over the last 15, 20 years, it's quite clear that a high proportion of the conflict and violence that we see in the world globally seems to occur between different religious groups or sects. Each think they have the secret to truth, the secret key. The divisiveness of religion, that it divides people, is one of the most serious problems in the modern world. It's the problem of why there hasn't been deep reconciliation in the Middle East. It's related to that. It's the problem of why in countries where there have been historical wrongs, that there aren't resolutions and peace. It's deeply entracted into many of these historical geographical conflicts. Now, I want to point out to you, and you'll know about these three different strategies, these three different ways. I want to point out to you that we use three different strategies in the world, governments and countries and us. We use three basic strategies to try to respond to and deal with this problem of the divisiveness of religion. And then we're going to come back to this question of, are all religions the same? Because it fits into this. So the first thing we try to do is to ban it. So for example, Sir Elton John advocates a more moderate form of this. I don't actually think he'd do this if he was Prime Minister, but he says, from my point of view, I would ban religion completely, even though there are some wonderful things about it. The reality is that organized religion doesn't seem to work. It turns people into hateful lemmings, and it's not really compassionate. Another form of this sort of ban it, stop it, force it out, don't allow it, is what we see happening in China, for example. So the first way that we try to deal with the problem of religious divisiveness is through government pressure, through controlling it, perhaps by bringing in laws that curtail and harness certain freedoms. So some governments have tried to do this. This is exactly what has happened in China. And now current estimates say that the percentage of the entire Chinese population that's estimated to be Christian believers is moving from about 1%, and it's moving upwards to about 45 to 50% of the population over a 100-year period. That's as a direct result, actually, of trying to stamp it out, so this clearly doesn't work. Christianity, actually, in particular, seems particularly to flourish when Christians are stamped on. It has a bit of a history of doing this in lions' dens and in different places. The second strategy is to ridicule it, is to make fun of it. Richard Dawkins says it's time for people of intellect as opposed to people of faith to stand up and to say, enough, no more. It's to make fun of it, to pull it out from underneath. You're not banning it and stopping people believing it, but this second strategy says that we can just sort of pull it apart intellectually. It won't stand up. It won't make sense. And so you find then the claims of religion being attacked whole scale through all sorts of different angles, all sorts of different lenses. And this is what we tend to do in the West more, in the secular sort of West. We tend to undermine and attack the confidence people have in religious claims. And you could do this quite overtly, like people like Richard Dawkins would do, or you can do it more subtly by putting the undercutting ideas in magazines or in TV programs or expressing them in series. And the undercutting ideas are things like this. Religion should be kept personal and private. All roads lead to the same place. Anybody who doesn't agree with that is arrogant. In other words, you're entitled to be religious, but do not bring that into our social or public life together. Here's an example, I think, of an undercutting idea about God and religious belief being offered in Sherlock. Hopefully this will play. If it doesn't, we'll get it playing so you can hear it. Oops, I think I've put the wrong audio source. Let me just correct that. There we go. That one. Okay, here we go. Hope this works.
And you too, Sherlock?
You too what?
Godfather? We'd like you to be Godfather.
God is a ludicrous fiction dreamt up by inadequates who abnegate all responsibility to an invisible magic friend.
Yeah, but there'll be cake when you do it.
I'll get back to you.
Did you hear it? Okay, let's have the volume up a little bit more. I'll play it. So they're having a discussion about godfathers, and they have a conversation about God, and Sherlock shares his view of God. You ready? A bit louder.
You too, Sherlock?
You two what?
Godfather? We'd like you to be Godfather.
God is a ludicrous fiction dreamt up by inadequates who abdicate all responsibility to an invisible magic friend.
Yeah, but there'll be cake when you do it.
I'll go back to him.
God is an imaginary fiction made up by inadequates who abdicate all responsibility to an imaginary friend. That's what he says. Interesting, isn't it? So you can have sometimes the explicit attacks on religious belief, and this is sort of hoped that this will be a way of curbing the religious divisiveness. Or you might do it sort of through teaching and offering the undercutting ideas in other ways. Or you might do it through stories or parables. Here's a story that's sometimes told, which is titled around and based around a poem called The Blind Men of Industan. It's an old Hindu parable. The reasoning here might look something like this. There are different blind men, visually impaired men or women as well, and they're touching an elephant. They don't know it's an elephant, and as they're touching different parts of the elephant, they're calling out. The one holding the ear is calling out, "Oh, I think it's a leaf. It's a giant leaf that I'm touching." The one holding the side of the elephant says, "No, it's a wall." The one holding the tail says, "I've got a rope here." The one holding the tusk says, "No, it's a spear." And the one holding the trunk says, "The reality is a snake." And this is used to sort of offer the idea that you shouldn't claim that you have more of the truth than anyone else. And people have used this old parable to share their opinion, their viewpoint that no one religion is the right route to God. And all of the different religions, all of the different perspectives are like the different people in the picture. They're all touching the same thing, but they don't know they are. And so they make these intolerant claims. And so the lesson and the message from this is we should never think that we possess the definite or concrete truth about God or about religion. And I actually think this is really well intended. And I think often the way people share this story and this picture is really, really well intended. And if that's where you're coming from, I want to try to have an honest conversation with you about why I don't think it quite works and how we can have a third way of approaching it that I think makes some sense and helps us even better. So the first thing I want to say in this conversation with you, thinking about these two ways, stamping it out or kind of undercutting it in explicit or implicit ways through media or through culture. The first thing I want to say in this conversation is I want to say that finding the truth does mean being open-minded. Finding the truth about anything in life means being open-minded. And sometimes we're so open-minded we don't commit to anything. And it's actually very difficult to move forwards with anything significant unless you make some sort of commitment to a framework being true and being accurate. We couldn't have gone and landed on the moon unless we had some sort of understanding that the framework roughly matched the reality of the mathematics of space or the way in which forces work on the planets. Sometimes we can make the mistake of being so open-minded we never make a commitment. On the other hand, we can be so close-minded that we don't hear anything new. I love this quote from G.K. Chesterton, the Catholic essayist and journalist. He says, "Merely having an open mind is nothing. The object of opening the mind as opening the mouth is to shut it again on something solid." So I want to encourage you to be open-minded, but also to be somebody who, when you see something is real and true, grab onto it. See if it works, test it, explore it. Second thing I want to say is this, is that I want to have a conversation with you about how important humility is. This is not a critique of the position you might have taken, seeing all religions as the same. But I do think that humility is a really important part of this conversation. I have met, and I'm sure many of you have met, arrogant religious people who have been offensive and rude. I've met people who have completely put me off God and religious belief because they're so convinced that they're right and everyone else is wrong, and they won't listen to anybody else, and they're blinkered, and it's not a good thing. Where that has been our experience, where that has happened to you, and where that person has been a Christian, I want to say that I'm sorry. I'm really sorry you've had that experience. I'm sorry if you've had that experience here. I'm sorry if you've had that experience anywhere. I've had that experience too. It's not right to have that experience of religious people, particularly Christians. Jesus, in fact, tells his followers that they are to be known and to live by love, gentleness, and respect for other people. So humility is really important, but facts are actually not capable of having the property of humility. A fact is either true or false. It doesn't really have the property of being humble or arrogant. So say you go to the doctor, and you've got an infection, or there's something wrong, and the doctor says, hopefully, this infection can be treated with this antibiotic, but not that collection of vitamins that you've got in your hand, or the crystal you've got in your bag. This infection can be treated by this antibiotic, and there's massive clinical evidence that it works. Now, if somebody said in response to that, that's not very humble of that doctor, I don't think that we would use that as a basis not to take the antibiotic. If the fact is true and if it would work, then it's true. And if someone tells you a true idea in an arrogant way, then it can be really unappealing. It can put us off, but it could still be true. That's the second thing I want to say. Humility is important, but facts don't tend to be humble or arrogant. That's more the damage we do as human beings when we get involved with facts and start making claims. The third thing I want to say is that the very nature of truth, like the nature of diamond, is that diamond is hard in its nature. And the nature of truth is that it excludes things that are not true, that contradict it. If something is true, the nature of water is wet, but if something's true and real by nature, then it may exclude some other things. Diamond is not hard and tough and wet and soft at the same time at a given temperature and pressure, for those of you physics nerds out there. Diamond is not hard and tough and wet and soft. It's one or the other. When something is true, it will tend to exclude the opposite. That's just part of what it means for something to be true. Reality isn't lacking humility for being as it is. That's just the way it is. And so if somebody says Jesus is the only way to God, then we might not want to listen if they're arrogant, but we shouldn't think that can't be true because it excludes other ways to get to God. The question is it true? Is there evidence for it? Is it reasonable? Is it actually real? And I also, fourthly, want to have a conversation with you about the blind men and the elephant. The parable teller has a very interesting perspective. The person who does the drawing, if you like, has a very interesting vantage point, don't they? They can see the entire elephant. They can see the different beliefs of the different people, who each represent one of the different great religions or belief systems of the world. And from that expansive viewpoint of being able to draw it or tell the poem or the story or paint the picture with words, from that expansive viewpoint, they see into all of the different religious traditions in the world. They see into all of the hearts of all the individuals that believe in those different traditions. And they say, you can't see, I can see. What they're really saying is, I can see beyond you, I can see reality, I can see the elephant, I can see all the people, I can see what they think they're feeling, I can see reality. But at the same time as they are saying something that contradicts that through the parable. So what they're saying is this: we all think we can see. Nobody should claim that they think they can see. We are like the blind men feeling the elephant. We think we see, but we don't. If anyone claims that they see an elephant, then you should not take them seriously. They don't really see. But how do you tell the parable? How do you paint the picture? How do you show the vision unless somebody sees? So maybe it's quite difficult to move forwards. And we tend to think that the different religions, this is my sort of moving towards the end now, what I'm going to sort of help you to think through is just, we tend to think that the different religions of the world, when we think they're all the same, we tend to think that the different religions basically teach the same thing. They have holy books, they have priests, they have communities, they emphasize things like love and worship. But do you know that actually their fundamental teachings on the nature and reality of God are radically different? So, for example, the Buddha was agnostic about God. In fact, I think if you understand the Buddha, it wasn't that there was a separate being from the universe, but it's actually that all reality is one. There's no different being. All reality is one reality. For a naturalist, somebody who is, say, an atheist, they would believe that there isn't a spiritual reality, a supernatural reality. They would instead believe that there's just the physical reality. For a Christian believer, they would believe that there's a holy family who unfolds out of love, a creation, and steps into that creation to rescue it and redeem it when it goes wrong. So the nature and reality of God is very different in the different religions of the world. And in fact, actually, one of the worst sins you can commit in Islam is to associate a partner to God. If you say that Jesus was more than a prophet in Islam, that's one of the greatest sins you can commit in Islam. Allah has no partners. He's one unitary being, no different persons. So it's a very different view of God. And the nature of what it is to be human is radically different. For the Buddhist, or for about a third of the world's, half of the world's Hindus, the perspective is that the human being is eventually absorbed into God and doesn't have a separate identity and a separate existence. You and I, for a Buddhist, are not different beings. We are one, and we have to overcome our perception that we're different beings. We even have to overcome our perception that there are such differences between things like right and wrong, up and down, left or right. The Buddha says they're just in the mind. So our view of human beings is utterly different. And as I described my conversation with the professor of computer science, very different views of what the nature of human beings are operate in our world. Some think it's just biomechanical machines. Some think it's biomechanical machines and a soul or a spark or something else. Very different descriptions of the human being. Thirdly, the diagnosis of what is wrong with the world is utterly different in the world's different religious perspectives and in the different answers that are out there. We might be tempted to say that all religions are the same, but they profoundly differ in what they say is wrong. For the Buddhists, the problem is rooted in epistemology, in our thinking. We've lost this knowledge that we're all one, and we need to adopt enlightening practices like the eightfold path and the Four Noble Truths in order to help us to see that all is one. And the answer is rooted in bad thinking. We're not thinking right. For other perspectives, like naturalism, atheism, we've got these brute instincts and these horrible religious impulses, and we're not socialized right. And if we can get that right and figure that out, then maybe we can fix what's wrong with human beings. Whereas Jesus turns up and he gives an utterly different answer. He says that there's something broken in the heart of people. We're somehow both glorious but also broken, and we do things that are wrong even though we know they're not the right thing to do, and we need fixing at a fundamental in our nature. He says it's in the heart the problem is. These are very, very different answers. And then the solution to what's wrong is utterly different. For the many different religious perspectives, you've got to follow the path on your own in an impersonal world. The world isn't offering a friend to go with you on that journey. For others, the process is to adopt this moral system, to live a really good moral life, be disciplined, use your self-discipline to live according to moral principles to improve your status, and that will fix what's wrong with the human heart, what's wrong and broken in the world. For other perspectives, the hope is in science or in technology or in analysis or in psychology. We'll figure it out. We'll come up with what's wrong because it's just us. We have to self-rescue. The Christian answer, again, is utterly unique. Christ himself says, you're not capable of doing it. I will come and be in your place. I will come and stand where you can't stand. I will come and live the perfect life and die the perfect death. And I will deal with what's wrong with you. And in order to reconnect you in a living friendship with God, which will be the transformational secret, which will change everything for you. So the answer is relational. It's a friendship rather than an impersonal answer or a materialistic, science-based answer that's just on our own resources. And then the final outcome and description of heaven is utterly different in the different religions and different perspectives in the world. So for some Hindus, the idea is that you will eventually be absorbed into God. You don't continue to have your own separate identity. You're absorbed into the divine being, and you cease to be. For other Hindus, you might sit with God. For other perspectives, you don't exist, and you realize that when you die because you become absorbed into the oneness of reality. For the Christian, the answer is that there's a promise of a world in the vision of John's vision expressed through the book of Revelation, that there's a world without pain, a world that's made new, a world that we see only some signs of now, but actually God is going to rescue us, and he's going to make a new world with new bodies, and he's going to wash away the tears in our eyes, and there'll be no more crying. There's a redemptive vision that's offered. So the different perspectives in the world are radically different. In fact, the only thing they probably have in common is they have books, and they have priests, and they have buildings. When it comes to their fundamental doctrines and ideas, they couldn't be more different. And in the scope of the different religions on offer, one stands apart, I would say, the religion of Christ, who says, I am your friend in this, I will be with you in this. It is deeply personal, and it's deeply enmeshed and wrapped around his love for us. And so the third strategy I want to suggest to you that we approach things with, rather than stamping out religion and the problem of religious divisiveness, and rather than trying to undercut it or ban it, is instead to approach it with a kind of humble realism. It might be true. We need to look into it. We're not going to ban it. We're not going to stamp it out. We're not going to just ridicule it. We're going to look into it and explore it in a sensible way. Why Christianity, though? Out of all the different religions in the world, why think that one is true, even if we no longer agree with the idea that all religions are the same? Why should we turn to Christian faith? Why not turn to one of the other ones? They seem peace-loving. They seem like they serve the poor and help people. Why Christianity? Well, I think I would recommend starting with Christian faith because you have immediate access to the data of it. You have immediate access to the communities who believe it, so you could ask questions and explore it. And in some ways, slightly uniquely as well, Christianity, of all the different perspectives out there, offers the evidence and the data before you have to believe. Before you have to commit, and before you have to say, yes, I confess, I think you're there, I think you're real. Christianity offers arguments, truth, and reasons. It offers data, historical data, all kinds of data points for you to think it through and consider it before you're asked to believe anything. And that's what something like the Alpha course is. It's an opportunity to explore the data, opportunity to explore questions. That's what coming and having a chat with Nico or coming and meeting up with a friend and asking your questions is. It's about exploring what the data is, what the evidence is. What's the evidence in the story of our lives? What's the evidence historically in the pages of Scripture about Jesus? And what's the evidence that we might point to? And in a unique and special way, Jesus claims that he's God himself, and he backs up that claim with miracles and all sorts of things. Let me give you an illustration here before I just make a practical application, and then I'll finish, I promise. So the illustration is this. Have you ever climbed a mountain? Have you ever looked up a mountain? Have you ever been skiing or been in the mountains and it's the most extraordinary environment. Even if you stand on top of the mountain, it's very, very difficult to see that all the paths from the bottom lead to the same place at the top. Certainly it's impossible if you stand at the bottom to say, oh, that path definitely goes up the top. I've tried it a number of times. It might wind along a valley at the side and then go up a mountain behind. It might just peter out and be, a path that goes to a nice picnic spot. It may not go up the mountain at all. But when you are looking and you're saying, wait, maybe all the paths go up to the top, you kind of need a perspective to see almost above the mountain that all of those paths go to the same place. That's an extraordinary claim to make in order to substantiate the idea that all religions are basically the same and go to the same place. The claim in Christian faith is not that Christians are so clever and so virtuous that they have climbed the mountain and now they can point back down the mountain and say, the church, it's God, it's Christianity, that's the answer. That is not the Christian claim. The Christian claim is this, that we have said we are beggars, we don't know, we are broken, we morally need forgiveness, we need revelation in order to know truth, and somebody has come down the mountain and that person is Jesus and he's told us the truth. The Christian claim is not, I've figured it out, I'm smart enough to figure it out, I'm virtuous enough to have seen the light and to be following it. That is not the claim. Christian faith is not a moral system of self-improvement. Christian faith is about God come down the mountain where we hold out our hands where we say, I have nothing to offer you, God. I'm a humble person. I have nothing to give you. I have no virtue or righteousness to boast of in front of a holy God like you. And Christ says, that's where I start. That's where my forgiveness comes in. That's where my rescue comes in. Because that's the open heart. That's the problem in the world that we need. So the Christian claim is not that we figured out a way up the mountain. It's that God has come down the mountain and revealed truth. He came down, and in this light, Jesus says, I am the truth. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And no one comes to the Father except through me. If the things around Jesus, if those miracles, if he raised people from the dead, if he grew back people's limbs in plain sight, if he exercised control over the storms and natural environments, if he knew people's secrets, if he knew how many people had been married to, if he knew all of the prophecies that were taking place around him, some are outside of his control, like the ones from Psalm 22, which took place while he was hanging there on the cross and couldn't bring them about. If all of that stuff around him happened, including his death and his resurrection and all of his teaching and the witness that he was to the people around him who were themselves convinced enough to put their trust in him, if all that stuff is true, then he's at least a good contender for us to say, God has come down the mountain. He's at least worth looking at. It's at least worth looking through the stories of his life and saying, I need to know more about this guy. I need to find out more about him. Now listen, every single one of us has a different perspective, has a different take, and each of us explore life and go about life in different ways. You've got different memories, you've got different experiences, you've had a different background, and you've got different questions. And I think that God wants to meet each one of us and to come down the mountain into each of our hearts in different ways. Some of us are thinkers. My encouragement to you is if you're a thinker who like logic and evidence and data and arguments and reasons and history, is push hard on that door. I pushed hard on that door. I found myself being pleasantly surprised by what Christian faith could offer in terms of substantial reasons and arguments and evidences. Please pursue it. Please explore it if that's some of the way you're wired. Look for objective facts. Look for it being systematically, logically consistent. Look for it being coherent and meshing with our known history of the world. You might be an intuitive. You might be somebody who hears a story or hears something that happens to somebody, or you see a value in something and you go, that is real and that's true and that's right. And you can just spot things about people when other people can't see things. I'm a little bit intuitive sometimes. I think that we tune into the values of Christ and his life, his justice, his truthfulness, his honesty, his sincerity. Read about him. Allow yourself to read the stories about him and weigh up in your mind, who was he? What was he like? And then thirdly, some of us are doers. Some of us are pragmatists. We want to know, does it work? What happens if we use it? It's a bit like the old test when you come back from the airport and you've put your car in the airport parking, but you can't quite remember which row it's in. Or maybe it's the supermarket and you're sort of wandering around. Have you done the bleeper test before? You're pressing the button, you're looking for the flashing lights of where the car is. Some of us will admit to doing this. I did it for about 45 minutes in LAX airport in California once. I was just in tears. I said goodbye to my fiancée. It was really difficult. But this test of does it work, it will respond and it will flash back if it's true. Put it on, try it out, explore it, see if it changes things in your life. If there's a struggle with anxiety in your life, if there's a struggle with being hopeful, try thinking, maybe this is true. What would it change if it was true? If I could talk to God and knew he was listening to my worries, what would that change? So, I want to encourage you to start with Jesus, explore him, investigate him, however you're wired, uncover, examine, test, ask, listen to questions, ask questions, listen to the answers. And Jesus' promise is this, and I'll leave you with this to reflect on as you think about what questions you'd like to ask. Jesus' promise is this: you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. I wonder what you want to ask. May I encourage you to turn to the person sitting next to you, and could you ask them, what would you like to ask? What question would help you to have answered? What would you like to know more about? I'll just give you a minute or two to do that.